Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are absolutely delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya, Ghana, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Michelle Nelson-Schmidt. She's returning to the show to celebrate her What If Monster chapter book series. Hey, Michelle, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jed, thank you so much for having me back. Such a pleasure to be here again.
I am really excited to have you back. Before I ask you about the What If Monster chapter books, because I know it's a series and it's a big series, can you give us an idea of how many books you have authored so far?
Because we haven't been in schools much, I have to count nowadays because kids ask you, that's always a question. So you have it off the top of your head. But I did just have a little Zoom, so I do know the answer right now. And with the chapter book series, it is 29.
Wow.
I've authored and illustrated 29 books.
That's phenomenal. And some of them have been traditionally published, and you're also self-publishing some books.
Yes, I am. My first middle grade was self-published, but this chapter book series is self-published, and it was honestly, I started it right before the pandemic hit, and what a blessing in disguise that was, because I was kind of thinking with my school visits, this is going to be crazy. I wanted to produce a book a month, and then we all know COVID happened and the lockdown, and boy, that was something that really filled my hours, and I was grateful for it. And I also realized, wow, if I'd been traveling, I don't know if I would have hit my deadlines.
Yeah. So tell us about the What If Monster chapter books.
Well, the book that it's based on, the character Jonathan James and the What If Monster, I have had so many amazing stories about how that little monster has helped so many children and adults deal with fear and anxiety. It's really just a tool that kind of reminds children to stop and think about the good what ifs. And being in schools for 10 years, it's actually my 10-year anniversary of being published this year. I have heard so many stories in the schools and so many kids and just experienced so much. And I wanted to give them more. I wanted to really, and to grow with my readers from picture books up to early reader chapter books. And so there's just so many scenarios of what ifs. And I decided basically I was going to have a book that deals with a particular what if that is very common for children to deal with. And that would be the focus. So they're each 3 chapters. They're 1,500 to 1,900 words. They're illustrated on every other page. So it's good for the early readers, the reluctant readers, and even read alouds for even the younger ones. And that was the basis. And I'll tell you, coming up with 18 what ifs was not hard. And there's just an unending source, unfortunately, of fears of this. And some are everyday fears, fear of trying out for a new sport, I even dealt with the death of a grandparent and those fears and all the emotions that come with that. So they cover a lot of different topics.
Wow. I'm happy that you wrote this series because it's a great way to start conversations about these different topics. But I'm also happy that in a way, you're helping kids train themselves to ask that question, because it's such a valuable question as we grow up and throughout our whole lives. It's like, oh, there's this problem. We have this obstacle, and everybody is telling us we can't deal with this. I mean, a lot of our society, we're kind of in this moment right now, and we need to be able to ask ourselves, what if we did it differently? What if we approached it this way or that way?
Yeah, and the tool that the What If Monster comes up with in the first book, and then it follows through through each of the books, is he asks, what is the silliest, craziest, best thing that can happen if you do that scary thing? And the kids come up with, and they want them to be like outlandish, crazy. What if an alien comes and you end up having to pinch hit for the game? It's just like crazy stuff that would never happen. And it gets sillier and crazier. And then by the time the kids go over all these crazy what ifs, suddenly it doesn't seem like a regular solution is out of the question anymore. They're like, okay, well, what bad thing might happen? And if it does, they feel equipped, and the kids discuss it throughout. And so the what if monster is just this playful little tool in the book, and he's an actual character that can be seen in the book. I just went with suspension of disbelief, like he just exists and everyone can see him, and I never explain it. And so it's just, and I have these kids that are reading this book, and the parents are telling me, we use that game now. When school is starting, what if I don't like my teacher? Well, what is the best, silliest thing that can happen if you go to school tomorrow? And then what? And then the kid plays out a scenario. Mm-hmm. And it's so rewarding to hear these stories already coming back, how it's really helping these kids. And it just kind of, I always say sometimes a bad thing does happen. And then what? And then what do we do? And I always say, there's always people that are going to show up to help you. Mm-hmm. And we seem to forget that, or we're going to learn something from if something bad happens. And it's just been a great situation to be in with these books and to hear these stories, and to know they're helping kids is, just everything to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things we've talked about here in the podcast a lot is just the fact that there are, and it's natural, there are so many parents who don't want anything bad to happen to their kids, so they tend to bubble wrap their kids, and they're very, very protective, and the kids are not going to scrape their knee, they're not going to experience any disappointments, they're going to play sports, but we're not going to keep score, and, nothing dangerous, and it's not realistic. And I don't think it helps, because at some point, kids are going to scrape their knee and become sad and experience a loss.
Yeah. And some of these kids get really lucky in these padded environments. And what happens if their first real big, quote, failure happens in college? Mm-hmm. You want some of these failures to happen when you can help manage the outcome. And in the book, there's one called The Accident. And the bad thing happens. I mean, Jonathan James is scared to climb this tree with his friends. And it's like a really great climbing tree. It's pretty safe for the average kid to get up. There's low branches. And they get him to get up. He faces his fears. He goes up on a kind of low branch, but he gets startled by a bird that flies by, and he falls out and he breaks his arm. And so not only does he overcome the fear and do the thing, but then the bad thing that he was worried about happening actually happens. And I play out that scenario so kids see that, one of the kids scrambles out of the tree. He runs and gets his mom, that they live in a house right nearby, and the ambulance has to come, and he takes him to the hospital. And you see the outcome when the kids come visit him in his bedroom when he's home resting. And they talk about how scary it was when he fell. But then they say, but then people showed up, and people in the park helped, and the mom came, and he had a broken arm, and that happened. And that's real life. And so that I wanted to address exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes that thing's going to happen, but he also faced a fear. Now, will he get back up in the tree again? Maybe, maybe not. But what he knows is that people were there to help him when something scary happened.
Yeah. And I like that too, because I don't think that message is shared enough. That, there are people out there that are going to help us. There's lots of people out there that are kind and caring. And yeah, there's people who make bad choices and people who aren't very helpful and are actually hurt folks. But I believe the vast majority of people are good and caring and are there for you and will be there for you when you need them.
I think so. And, we see it so much with all, in adults, when something bad happens, there's always a GoFundMe. There's always people there for strangers a lot of the times, because you see it on Facebook all the time or on Instagram, where people share when something bad happens. And the good, helpful people always outnumber the bad people, or the indifferent, the apathetic people, not even the bad people. There's just so many of us out there willing to help. And I think, you're right that it doesn't get shared enough for there's going to be people. But I also believe when you focus on the good, when you really think about what if I can, what if this good thing happens, what if I can do it, I do think you increase your odds tremendously for that positive outcome. Mm-hmm. So that's the benefit of focusing on the good what ifs, because I really think you do. When you can visualize it happening, when you can see it happening, and even with publishing, I mean, I deal with a lot of adults, but they're so scared of rejection. And I'm like, well, you better get over that, because you're about to be rejected and question everything about you, and it hurts. Like, I still don't like to get rejected, and I'm about to submit for traditional publishing again, and I got to steel up, because especially when you self-publish, there's no rejection there. There's edits from your editor is about as close as it gets. But it's just not always easy, but it's rewarding to put yourself out there, because it eventually, I think, when you put that positive mindset out and you're not willing to quit, you will get to your goal.
Yeah. Yeah. When I coached a high school soccer team, one of the things I used to tell the kids is you will miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Yeah.
You got to go out there and you got to give it a shot. You got to try. You got to take a risk. So important for our kids. And one of the things we used to do with our kids when they were younger and much like you described in the book, is just sit down with them and say, well, what if you fail? What if you go out there in this dance competition, and what if you forget your choreography, or if you fall flat in your face? And so what happens then? We're still going to love you.
Right.
So, yeah. You must have faced a lot of what ifs going from, being traditionally published and then deciding, this next book, I'm going to do it on my own. That must have taken a lot of courage for you.
There was. One, you think, how is my own publisher going to react to that? Mm-hmm. Is that going to upset them? And I really don't know that answer at this point. I hope it hasn't. I think it's only increased sales across. But, I took, and it is a character that, I have the rights to and everything like that. But, you don't want to step on too many toes. And then, even though I knew how to do many of the things, I was a graphic designer, so I know how to lay it out myself. I'm the illustrator, so I could pay for that. But there's still a financial, you're putting it out there, and then you order these books and you hope, because I didn't do it, like, especially with children's books, you can't just rely on ebook sales because they're not there for kids' books. And so I had to order these books and have them, and to see, are people going to order them? And even though I did some pre-sales, when I set it up, are people going to order them? And they did, but you're putting your heart on the line, you're putting your ego on the line. And, I said in July, I just finished all 18 books this past July 1st. And I put things on Facebook. I say my big giant goals out loud, which helps me reach them, but also makes it very public when I don't reach them. So on July 1st, I said, I want to sell 100 sets of my children's book, which is 1,800 books. I wanted to sell them and ship them out. And so I told everybody that. And, I was scared of failing that one publicly, but I ended up selling 176 sets. So instead, I beat that goal by a lot, and people wanted to help me. So that's incredible. That really is wonderful.
One of the things, we do have a lot of authors who listen to the show, and it's obviously that when you went into self-publish the What If Monster chapter book series, you approached it as a business. And that's one of the things we talked about here in the show. Can you just kind of reinforce that idea that as a children's book author, you're an author, you're an artist, you're a creative, but in order for it to work, even if you're traditionally published, you have to look at it as a business. You have to realize that you're the CEO of your book.
Absolutely. And I get that in the beginning. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, so I've kind of always had the business set, but working with children, it's a tough line sometimes to, I just want to do it. I just want to make people happy, or if it's a hobby. But if you want to make money from this, and it's very possible to make good money from this, you have to treat it like a business. You have to know what your expenses are. You have to know your time, what you're doing. That time is worth, a certain amount of money. And you have to, it's like with school visits. Everybody's like, you should do them for free. And that drives me crazy when authors will give school visits for free, because then they're cutting every other author that's trying to do school visits. It's a valuable service that you're offering, and you shouldn't give it away for free. And you don't want schools to expect that. And most don't, but when, especially, and it's usually self-published authors that will do this because they're trying to get into the school. And I get that. But if, like anything, how much do you value free stuff? Most people and schools, if something's free, and I've done it where somebody asked me to do it for free within, like I was doing 10 other school visits, and they said, well, you do this one for free, and they give you the sob story. And so you say, okay. And almost 9 times out of 10, that school did not prep the kids. That school didn't do anything. The kids had no clue that you were coming that day because they didn't value it. It was a freebie. It was, don't worry, that's free. We're not. But when the school has spent money on you, they prepare the children. They want to get their money's worth. Yep. And that is the same thing why you shouldn't give your books away. If you give a book to somebody and they didn't have to pay for it, they're probably not going to sit down and read it to their kid. But when they've paid money for it, now they value it. And that is just the way it works. And it's sometimes authors have a hard time with that. But I want to make money from my business. I want to be one of the top percentage of authors and illustrators that make a really good living from their work. And I do. And I think that's because from the very beginning, I chose to treat this very, very professionally, as if I could have been anything. I could have been a plumber starting a business, or an electrician, or anything that I was going to start. I took it as serious that same way. Yep.
I absolutely concur on your experience about the freebies. Even in my case, I'm not going to say I've never given a free show, but I know when I've gone in and a hospital or some kind of agency has decided, well, we're going to sponsor you to go into the school. So the school is not paying for you directly. And there have been a number of times when I've shown up and people are like, oh, man, we forgot you were coming. And, well, can you come back next week? No, I'm 1,000 miles away from my home. So
you're right. And it happens with sponsors when a business sponsors it. And that is even more upsetting, because then the school disregarded 2 businesses, the people that paid for it and the person showing up. And that's why I try, to tell them, fine, you can have a sponsorship and that works. But then I let them know that sponsor is going to show up at the school. So you try to put any organization just to understand these are businesses and this matters to people. And, there's nothing like sitting down and I always talk to my front row kids and you're like, so what do you think? Do you know about my book? And they're like, no, I don't know who you are. What are we here for? What? And you're like, oh, that feels so good. That feels so warm and fuzzy. But you win them over after you've done your performance. So there's always that.
Absolutely. Yes. That is our job to win them over. And it's a wonderful feeling. So, in addition to, I'm just going to back you up. In addition to, making a living, if you're at a point where you are being invited into schools, it is such a joy. For over 30 years, I've been traveling around the country doing my educational magic shows, and for a school to take the time out take the precious time out to bring their kids down, you got to be ready. You got to give them a great show. If you're there to read your book to the kids, then you got to read it like you're Olivier. You just got to do the best job you can. And when you do that, the joy that you get back from the kids it's indescribable.
I think we talked about this the last time. The magic that happens, the energy that starts to go back and forth between you and the children. And I think you're right. It's when you're so in your element, and that comes from practice. That comes from knowing what you're going to say. That comes from your books are memorized, and, it's always natural. And I always sometimes go off the cuff when it warrants it, but I know what I'm there to say, and I know what I'm there to help the children feel. And that comes from, again, taking it very professionally and my timing. I know if something's gone off and I'm going a little long, and I've got to shorten it up, because the time, you're right, it's precious and it's valuable. And these teachers, to give you that hour is everything, because they are under so much pressure, and you want to make sure that everybody that's watching you enjoys it, but gets value from it. And that's part of the business of it too, is if you're not ready to perform, then, you get your practice. And I know that it's hard to say, how are you going to get practice if you're not in front of kids? Then you know what? You go to a YMCA, ask them if you can practice, and you can talk to your kids, and you find a situation where you are willing to do it for free. And actually, I did my first 6 months when I was going into schools. I did it for free, which I'll tell you, you will get booked a lot if your cost is free. But I was there to make sure that when I was ready to charge, I knew what I was worth, I knew my value, and I knew that if somebody wasn't willing to pay me at that point, that it was okay for me to say, well, I'm sorry, I won't work for free, because I'd put that time in, and I knew I was that good and I deserved what I was asking. And that's something that I think is really important if you're considering going into the schools too, to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love what you said, and I just want to kind of emphasize it, put a line underneath it. When you're creating your show, your presentation, when you're putting it together, I think one of the first things you need to ask yourself is, how do you want the kids to feel at the end of your performance?
Yeah. And that is, see, I just got goosebumps when you said that, because it brought me back to the end. And the best compliment I ever had was a little girl that said, Miss Michelle, you made me feel like I was at church. And how she meant it was, I'm inspired. I feel good about myself. I feel loved, and I feel like I matter. And that is what my whole point is. The kids understand you're special, you matter, you're here to do something, you're here to share your magic with the rest of us. And when kids say those types of things to me, then I know I did my job, and that's my goal, is how I want children to feel.
Yeah. And I think it's a great thing for parents to remember when you pick up a book to read with your kids is, how do I want my daughter, my son to feel at the end of this book?
That's great.
I know that there are many times that, I was crying along with my kids as we were reading certain books. And it was a beautiful thing. It's just a beautiful thing.
Well, you mentioned before we started talking Kate DiCamillo, and again, I gush over her books. If you're, oh my gosh, they're the best good cry books ever. And this is a little plug for her, for anybody that's listening. If you have not read her books, go to the library and clean out the shelf and read them all. They are life-changing, her books. I can't say enough good things about them. And I hope one day to write middle grade novels anywhere in the stratosphere of her, because that's the feel of those books is what I'm trying to do with my picture books. It really is. She's always been such an inspiration.
Well, if you're listening out there, you can check our archives for Kate's first appearance. And then you can also check back at the end of September. Kate will be coming back on the show to celebrate her new book. Michelle, where can people go to find out more about the What If Monster chapter books and all the other great stories that are coming from you?
Well, I have my own website, and it is MNS Creative. So for Michelle Nelson-Schmidt, MNS Creative, but whatifmonster.com also does go there. Might be easier to remember. And if you want a book signed from me, I offer personalization, and I have all my picture books, all my chapter books on there. But you can also buy on Amazon.com, and that's fine if you want to do it on Amazon. But you can also request with my chapter books through your local bookstore. Mm-hmm. You can request my books through there. I always want to support the indie bookstores because they're so good to us self-published people too. So that's always great. So you can get it through your local. You can get it on Amazon or from the author MNS Creative.
Yeah, I was so thankful for Amazon, but, throughout the pandemic and for a lot of other things, but they have enough of my money right now. They can survive. And so definitely pick up the phone, call your local bookshop and say, hey, I want the What If Monster chapter books from Michelle Nelson-Schmidt. Can you get them to me? And I know that they're going to say, yeah, come over in a day or two.
That would be amazing because the more people that know those books and get into bookstores, that is truly the very best for me is if you request from your local bookstore because then they're like, who is this person? Mm-hmm. And they might end up carrying my books because they'll order just a set just for you. They'll do it. But they might end up carrying more of my books in their store, and that would be amazing.
That would be amazing. Well, this has been amazing, chatting with our friend Michelle Nelson-Schmidt about her brand new chapter book series, the What If Monster chapter books. Hey, Michelle, thanks for being back with us.
Jed, thank you so much. This was so wonderful.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. In fact, make it easy on yourself, please. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Amazon Music, Spotify, Ghana, Himalaya, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, Podbean. You kind of get the idea. Wherever you find your podcast, you can find the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And we love that you're joining us. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Michelle Nelson-Schmidt. Please be sure to check out her What If Monster chapter book series. I also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.